You see it in headlines all the time. New sanctions announced. More sanctions against this country or that leader. But what does that actually mean? Do sanctions really change anything? Or do they just make life harder for ordinary people? In this video, we will break down how sanctions work, why governments use them, and how economic pressure can reshape global politics without a single shot being fired. Welcome to Global Analysis Point. Let's start with a simple definition. Sanctions are restrictions one country or a group of countries uses to punish or pressure another country, organization, or person. Instead of using tanks and missiles, they use money, trade, and access to the global economy. Sanctions can limit what a country can buy or sell. They can freeze bank accounts. They can block companies from doing business in certain markets. So in short, sanctions are a way to say, we strongly disagree with what you are doing, and we will make it economically painful until you change course. Not all sanctions look the same. First, there are unilateral sanctions. This is when one country acts alone. For example, the United States deciding to sanction a foreign government by itself. Then there are multilateral sanctions. These are coordinated by a group of countries or international organizations like the European Union or the United Nations. Multilateral sanctions are usually harder to escape because more of the world is involved. We can also divide sanctions by what they target. There are targeted or individual sanctions. These focus on specific people, politicians, business leaders, and military officers. Their assets abroad can be frozen. They can be banned from traveling to certain countries. There are sectoral sanctions. These hit entire parts of an economy, like the banking sector, energy exports, or high-tech industries. And then there are financial sanctions, for example, blocking banks from using the global payment system or limiting access to the US dollar, which is still the main currency of world trade. Each type works differently, but the goal is the same: to create pressure strong enough to influence political decisions. On paper, sanctions sound simple. Someone does something unacceptable. The international community responds with economic pressure. But what are sanctions actually supposed to achieve? First, they are meant to change behavior. For example, to stop a nuclear program, to end a military invasion, or to push a government to respect human rights. Second, sanctions can be used to weaken a country's ability to finance war, terrorism, or illegal activities. Third, they send a political and moral signal. Even if the sanctions do not immediately change anything, they show the world that certain actions are not acceptable. And finally, sanctions often have a domestic function. Leaders can show their own voters that they are doing something without sending troops into a conflict. So in theory, sanctions are a middle ground between just words and full-scale war. In practice, sanctions work through access. Modern economies are deeply connected. Countries trade across borders. Banks move money in seconds. Companies depend on foreign technology and investment. When sanctions cut off access to these networks, the effects can be painful. A country under sanctions might struggle to sell its main exports, face difficulties paying for imports, or lose access to critical technologies like advanced computer chips or energy equipment. This can lead to currency problems, rising inflation, and lower living standards. Businesses may close. Investors may leave. Ordinary people may see prices skyrocket in shops. At the same time, governments under sanctions often try to adapt. They search for new trading partners. They use alternative currencies. Sometimes they build parallel financial systems. So sanctions are rarely a simple on or off switch. They create long chains of economic reactions, and these reactions often shape politics in unexpected ways. To see this more clearly, let's look at three short examples. First, Iran. For many years, Iran has faced heavy sanctions, mainly because of its nuclear program. Sanctions have targeted its oil exports, its banks, and key industries. This has put strong pressure on the Iranian economy, causing inflation and unemployment. At times, sanctions pushed Iran to the negotiating table, leading to nuclear agreements. At other times, political tensions grew and sanctions were tightened again. Second, Russia. After actions in Ukraine, many Western countries imposed sanctions on Russia. These included financial sanctions against major banks, restrictions on technology exports, and limits on energy projects. The goal was to raise the economic cost of military decisions and to reduce Russia's access to Western capital and technology. Russia responded by trying to redirect trade, develop its own systems, and strengthen ties with non-Western partners. Third, North Korea. North Korea is one of the most heavily sanctioned countries on Earth because of its nuclear weapons and missile tests. Sanctions have severely limited its trade and access to finance, but the ruling regime has remained in power, partly through strict internal control and alternative networks of support. These three examples show a pattern. Sanctions can hurt economies. They can create pressure, but they do not always lead to quick political change. So the big question, do sanctions work? The honest answer is, sometimes yes, sometimes no, and almost never quickly. Sanctions are more likely to work when many countries participate, when the goals are clear and limited, and when there is a realistic way for the targeted country to change its behavior and get sanctions lifted. For example, stop one specific program and we will remove these specific sanctions is more realistic than change your entire political system. Sanctions are less likely to work when the targeted government does not depend much on global trade, can find alternative partners, or can use sanctions as propaganda, blaming foreign enemies for economic problems and tightening control at home. In some cases, sanctions even strengthen authoritarian regimes because they can rally people around the idea of external threats and defending the nation. Another critical question is, who actually pays the price for sanctions? In theory, sanctions are designed to hit leaders and elites. In practice, ordinary people often feel the impact first. Prices of food, fuel, and medicine can rise. Jobs can disappear. Access to international education or travel can be restricted. Companies in both the targeted country and in sanctioning countries may lose business opportunities. That is why some experts argue for more precise, targeted sanctions that focus on key decision makers in specific sectors instead of entire populations. Balancing moral goals, political pressure, and humanitarian consequences is one of the biggest challenges in sanction policy. Looking ahead, sanctions will likely remain a central tool of foreign policy. However, the more they are used, the more countries look for ways to reduce their dependence on traditional financial systems and dominant currencies. We may see more regional alliances, more trade in alternative currencies, and more efforts to build separate economic networks. In other words, sanctions not only react to global politics, they also help reshape it. Sanctions are often described as war by other means, but they are more complex than that. They can be a powerful form of pressure, a symbol of moral stance, or a slow, painful burden on ordinary people. They rarely act alone. Their real impact depends on diplomacy, domestic politics, and how the global economy responds. If you found this breakdown helpful and you want more calm explanations of global events and geopolitics, consider subscribing to Global Analysis Point and turning on notifications. Thanks for watching and see you in the next analysis.